Thank you.
Good evening. Welcome to the first Think and Drink event in Oregon Humanities 2015 year. Thank you. I think I can speak for everyone at Oregon Humanities when I say that we're thoroughly delighted that so many of you are here, and we're especially delighted and honored that Barry Lopez is here to kick this series off. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
I'm going to just say a couple quick thanks to people and organizations that have made this possible. And I want to start with the Oregon Cultural Trust, which does so much to make this and hundreds of other events around the state possible. So big thanks to the Oregon Cultural Trust. We're going to be talking we'll be talking about place, among other things, and it is unique, the Oregon Cultural Trust. It's unique across the country, and it's a real treasure to have out here, so thank you. Willamette Week has, I don't know if everyone has seen this, but there's a really wonderful interview with Barry in yesterday's Willamette Week. And then I just want to thank a few organizations that helped get the word out, and I think listening to what these organizations are gives real insight into the breadth and depth of the work Barry has done both on the page and off the page and continues to do. So we've had help getting the word out about this from Literary Arts, from City Club of Portland, from the Oregon Historical Society, and from the Coalition of Oregon Land Trusts.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So when you think about that, that's already giving us some sense of what I hope we'll start to talk about. The last thing I want to say before starting a conversation here, and I should say we'll talk for about an hour, and then there's a microphone over there, and we'll invite questions for about a half an hour. The last thing, I guess, by way of introduction is that coming from Oregon Humanities, our goal as an organization right now, the vision we're after, is an Oregon that invites diverse perspectives, explores challenging questions, and strives for just communities. That's what we're after. And as we think about that as the guidepost for all of our work, we really couldn't think of anyone better than Barry to address all four of those and to really exemplify what it means to pursue that. And so delighted, Barry, that you've joined us to help us think about this. And I think what I'd like to do is start our conversation with a fairly mundane question, and it's related to on the one hand, thinking about justice, but especially when you write about justice and you talk about justice, it's often tied to a sense of place, a very specific place. And so I just wanted to ask you, as you came up today from Finn Rock and drove up to Portland, what it felt like. What does it feel like to drive up from where you live up here to Portland?
Well, at first, if I may, I want to thank everybody for coming this evening, and we're both hopeful that you will feel when you leave that your time was well spent. The other thing I need to say is so much of what we'll talk about this evening is something that are things that I've learned from somebody else. And so I want to thank my teachers, some of whom are here this evening, for the patience over the years with me trying to learn outside outside my culture, I guess. I've been in the same house there on the Upper Mackenzie River for 45 years now. And it's a type of ground zero for me. I think as a child growing up in Southern California, my ground zero, my safe place, was in the Mojave Desert or Grand Canyon and places like that. They resonated for me metaphorically as well as realistically, and the combination of the real metaphor, or reality rather, and the metaphor was something that was incomprehensibly exciting to me when I was a child. And later, you know, my mother married again and we moved to New York City, and when I was 11, and I had that privilege of being in all of these incredible museums and going to the theater, and I had an exposure in prep school to really the history of Western ideas. So by the time I was in my late teens, I had come to understand the world in terms of trying to use the metaphors I was comfortable with, which I guess are geography and natural history and things like that, and trying to go deep in them to find out what it is that made us yearn or feel grief as human beings. So, you know, you'd like to think that there's a map behind you that has a straight line, but you know, that's, I think I said this to you once about colonizing the past, that I find myself looking back and thinking I was doing one thing when clearly I wasn't, you know, but it's more convenient to remember that, you know, to be able to tell somebody, oh yeah, I felt like that all my life. There is a way that I just gravitated toward this place on the Upper Mackenzie River, and it has fed me ever since. And I try to pay attention there every day, and the longer I've been there, the more intricate and magnificent this place is. And that's been a great life lesson, that all places, if you just have an attitude of reverence or curiosity or respect, open up. So when I leave a well-known ground where I'm very, very comfortable spiritually, psychologically, intellectually, and come to Portland, even though I come up here, you know, 10 times a year or something, Portland is exotic. No, it truly is, you know. When Deborah and I were driving over here tonight, we were looking at some trees, and it's so instructive to see that everything was built without regard for their needs. You know, you're just a millimeter from what happened to Native people in North America, that we built this civilization without regard for 500 epistemologies, ways of knowing that we decided it was okay to throw them away. And now we're in desperate need of them. So we find ourselves going back to cultures that we thought were inferior, and understanding that another miracle, elders are still around and articulate and doing the work they've always done, which is to take care of their people. So when I see those trees, I'm reminded of ethical situations and American history, and the intensity of the experience of coming to Portland is that you can go to the art museum, or you can go to galleries, or you can go to this rich film culture that's here, and if you're not careful, it just could knock you over.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, even while you were talking, it made me remember in your essay, Apologia, you're in the car for most of that essay, which must be why it went off in my head. And it's a short essay, but it's about stopping to remove, the crude word would be roadkill, from the road. As you drive by, if you see two raccoons, you pull your car over, you stop, and you find a better resting place for them. It felt like that essay is both about literally moving animals that have been killed off the road, and it felt like other kinds of damage that we do and drive right past.
That's interesting. You know, there's such an obsession in this country with the importance of the individual that we've allowed the capacity that we have to understand what a community really is to atrophy. And I remember that trip I took was 1989, and I was driving from Oregon to South Bend, Indiana, to spend a semester teaching in the American Studies Department at Notre Dame. And it has been my practice for a long time to get animals that have been killed by vehicles off the road and into, as you said, a better resting place. And you know, when somebody says, well, why do you do that? I have to think, who is this person and what of my interior am I going to reveal by saying, by offering an answer? But one answer that I have had is that animal that is dead in the road could have been an elder in his own culture, and this is a tragedy more deep because what that animal knew is now not available to the others because it was killed by a truck or something like that. Now, there are several ways to understand that idea, but you know, that's the heart of literature, which is to involve yourself in the so-called real world and see what real depth is, and to see that the world that surrounds you, if you just become open to it and don't have that sense that you know, but that the world knows. You know, I remember saying to somebody once that I was so impatient with this idea of individual genius, where we see genius in an individual woman or an individual man, but really it belongs to the community. It's just manifest in that person. And so it's a good frame of mind to have that the possibilities for holiness, if you will, exist all around us. You know, we don't have some kind of special gift that allows us to see the light. That the light is coming from all of these different directions. It's good just to be grateful for it. And by taking those animals off the road and giving them a better place, you're just reminding yourself of the need to be ethically responsible in your own world, because if you're not, too many doors will close and you'll end up at the end of your life ignorant.
Yeah, I mean, and in that essay, you talk about a technique of attention.
Yeah, technique of awareness.
The technique of awareness. Yeah. In a way, what is interesting about that is technique sounds like it can be learned. Yeah. So on one hand, I want practiced and hopefully, maybe not learned, maybe practiced. And then I guess the other thing that really comes out of there for me that I guess I wanted to ask a little bit about is that's overwhelming. How it's even your own car as you drove is picking up birds and all sorts of animals, and that's true for all of us, our car and all sorts of other things. And so let's say we do practice that technique of awareness. How to practice that without being overwhelmed by it?
You open up as much as you can. You know, your parents die and you're filled with grief, and it's not easy to be open to the world. You lose a child, or you get cancer, or you know, whatever it is, the tragedy that visits a person, and it closes you down. And in a moment like that, you understand why you live in a community, because when you go down, the community keeps the world open, keeps those things flowing through you, and you can heal. That idea of a technique of awareness, and I would say, yes, a technique of awareness for me, I'm not asking anybody else to participate, but the way that I remind myself of my responsibilities as a human being is, you know, maybe to get animals off the road, but where that phrase comes from, the history of it in my mind, is that it would make me so impatient to hear that a culture that you condescended to was full of superstition. I've spent a lot of time trying to pay attention in contexts that were defined by people outside my own culture. We were traveling together, you know, traveling in the Arctic with Eskimos, or traveling with Aboriginal people, and in the Northern Territory, or, Kamba people in Africa, whatever it was. I was the odd person out, and I knew the only way I'd ever learn anything was to shut up and imagine something greater than what I could comprehend, and just leave it be, So, to just pick an example out of thousands, I was hunting once with Yupik Eskimo people in the northern Bering Sea, hunting walrus, a great big animal. For somebody like me, it's kind of really, really hard to see an animal that big die. How much blood and the end of a very big life. But when we were butchering a walrus on an ice floe, I saw an older man cut a little piece of meat, and he was on his knees working, and he put that little piece of meat in his hand, and then he just lowered it like that into the water. You didn't have to have a university education to understand that you're in the presence of the sacred in a moment like that. But I can imagine many people in my own culture saying, oh, well, that's just a superstition. He's doing that to say thank you to the sea because the sea gave him. But this is not superstition. This is that man's technique of awareness, to remind himself, even in his 50s, older man, that this was not here for the taking. This animal gave itself, and by saying thank you in that way, he put himself back in a set of relationships that would preserve his own spiritual health and not incidentally his own physical health.
At the beginning of that comment, you talked about being impatient with seeing condescension.
Yeah.
And what I want to ask about is that technique of awareness, noticing all the wrongs that we ourselves do
Right.
and that others do. It seems to me it can lead to many different emotions, all of them strong. And I wonder what you most feel when you're aware of these things and what you think we most should feel.
I don't know what people should feel other than alive. Joseph Campbell said once that we all talk about, we all say that we want to go to heaven. But he said what we really want is to live fully. And I would say, as a writer, and just as another person walking around in the world and meeting people, I want to see everybody come fully to life. And the things that stifle a person's life, condescension, racism, all of the tentacles of that dark animal injustice. I want to cut those arms off, of that animal, like an octopus or something. I'm going off in a bad place myself here.
But I mean, in a way, that's part of seeing wrong.
Yeah.
For me, often I get angry. Sometimes when I see wrong and I know that I'm complicit in doing it,
Yeah.
I feel resigned. When it's really bad, I feel despair. Anger can feel relatively good. That's why I'm trying to get a sense of seeing all that, being aware of all that.
You can't tell anger never to show up. So it's going to be there. What you have to do, I think, is turn it inside out. And you have to be smart and patient with yourself and strong and say, the easiest thing to do here is to condemn or to judge. Okay, then what? How are you going to get to the next step? If you walked out in the audience here and asked any person out there they could tell you a story that would break your heart. And you would think to yourself when you walked away, how did this woman ever get up onto her feet again? So I think you have to approach people who are just spitting bigotry or who are profoundly ignorant and violent. You just have to find a way to work with it, because this situation that we're in, the political situation that we're in the United States, with democracy pretty much unraveled, and this, just lie awake at night and think, what would you do if you were a Kurd? You've got 3 different groups of people around you, all of whom want you to bleed to death. So all of that is going on all the time, and you have to meet it in a strong way. You have to measure your own strength. You can't go up against something that's going to tear you apart. But you have to learn how to take these things like being angry and shift them, give them. I said to somebody once, when you're young, you want to find the enemy and kill the enemy. And what you have to learn is that the thing that you want to do is not that, but to make the enemy irrelevant. And the way to do that is to understand that all of the energy that you put into identifying the enemy and hunting the enemy down and killing the enemy is exhausting, and it's all energy given away that could have been spent on making something beautiful. And whatever it is that you make beautiful, a child or a short story or, whatever it is that you make in your life, you're trying to make beauty, and by doing that, you give the things that you identify as the enemy less and less and less space to stand in. So if you take the energy that you feel, you feel this anger when you're young, and you want to direct it against the things that threaten life and suffocate life, and instead direct it toward making life, making something beautiful, then the things that you identify as antithetical to all life have less and less room to maneuver. So, I think we're living now in a time of coming to grips with what it means to be profoundly forgiving. Profoundly forgiving. And instead of identifying people and cursing them and saying the world would be better off without them, they are the world. They are part of the world. And you can't do this kind of idiotic house cleaning of good and evil, good and evil. Was it Rumi who said, there is a place beyond good and evil, meet me there? And that's, I think, the situation that we're in now. I remember in the 1960s when I was writing a lot for environmental magazines, and I got so tired of the shrill, condescending, superior tone of so many of these pieces, and I thought, so many of us are just trying to understand what in the world is going on, and we don't need to be berated. We need to be taken in as ordinary human beings and treated as equals, so we can understand what's going on here, and then we can make a community decision.
So in terms of sort of understanding what's going on here, the state we're in, and I'm going to ask you to generalize, which is probably already a dangerous road to go down, because who knows how you answer. Let's go. Okay. Thank you. I mean, right at the end of your comment, you talked about things that people don't understand, and I guess I wonder, in a couple different places in your writing, especially Dark Light in the West, on racism and reconciliation in the West, talk about ways that Oregonians misunderstand their own history to some extent. And I guess I want to ask if you think that is still true now. Do you think that there are things about us that we don't pay sufficient attention to?
Oh, of course, I mean, I guess I back up one step and say, it's easy to feel, if you grow up in this country, that you're informed, and with a little effort you can become really well informed, and to miss entirely that you don't know what's going on. So, when I was 17, I made with some prep school friends of mine, and under supervision. We spent, I think, 10 weeks traveling in Europe, and I saw all the touchstones, all the intellectual touchstones that I had become familiar with as a student, as a 13 or 14-year-old kid. And I saw the contexts that I found these things in, wandering around by myself in the Prado in Madrid. It was different from what I was taught. It had its own context, and it couldn't be summarized the way it was summarized for me, and I know why it was, but that little seed got planted, and, I've had a life. I've been incredibly fortunate to see a lot of the world. I had to do this for some kind of biographical thing the other day, and so I actually counted the countries that I'd been in. 97. I'd been to 97 countries, and wow. But I know one reason I was doing that is to guard against complacency, to look at a little bit of this and a little bit of that and then think you understand everything. The world is incomprehensible. The world is, and that's part of what makes it so profoundly beautiful, is that it is beyond comprehension. And you immerse yourself in it from time to time and feel grateful for the experience, but you don't pronounce yourself an expert in what people do. I mean, people are really different, and you ignore that at your peril. How really different people are, not just from one person to another, but that it's very hard to address international problems with international people and not people who more or less defer to an American way of knowing or to a Western European way of knowing. And it's the struggle that is here with us now is we're pushed, where our faces are pushed up against understanding what's going on in those 97 other countries, or 312 or whatever there are at the moment. We need to do that. And in order to do it, you have to disabuse yourself of the idea that you're going to figure it out. Nobody's going to figure this out. Figuring out your own home is as complicated as figuring out God.
It's very, yes.
But in Oregon, I see, I would say, sojourning in different countries and traveling with people and listening to what they have to say. What do I want to say? It's really difficult to be a human being. It's really, really hard to become a full-blown human being. And when you are making that effort all of the time, you're so aware of the ways in which you fail, and you fall short in your own eyes, and you fall short in the eyes of others. And we all, I think, have similar ways of dealing with what comes over us, which is we're afraid. We're afraid to be alive. It is a difficult thing, and it is easy to become afraid. You should be afraid. The more awake you are, the more afraid you should be, I think. And we all take this step that I wrote about in that essay, which is to just ignore the things that contradict the bliss that we think we have here, So when you go to, when I was in Afghanistan, I got into the habit in villages of interviewing people about what it is that they wanted. What, at that time, do they want the Karzai government? Do they want NATO? Do they want American troops? Do they want Taliban? What is it that they want? And in the answers that I got, with the help of a translator, what I saw was that they do something similar to what I do, or you do, or people here do, which is to rearrange the past in order to be able to bear the present, in order to bear up with the present condition. Then you do this thing that I call colonizing the past. And, you know, that's happened in Oregon. Oregonians believe that that there's less racism in Oregon than there might be in, say, Alabama. And I would say no. There are so few people of color here that the issues of racism that have to be dealt with have remained unspoken. Nobody really talks about them. And you're living in a country we won't talk about. Jefferson had this remarkable idea about a democracy that derived from all these Enlightenment philosophers that he read, and the only thing missing for Jefferson was a continent. He needed a continent in order to implement all of these ideas and build this idealized society. And so in order to do that, we killed everybody who lived here. And we really don't want to come to grips with that. And we don't want to come to grips with the fact that we don't want to come to grips with slavery. And so when you travel in a place like Afghanistan and you go into a little village and you ask them what they want, you can feel people saying, please, don't come from a country as racist as yours was and is, and from a country that killed almost all of the people that were living here in order to make what you think of as an ideal life. Don't come in here and don't tell me that that didn't happen or you can't face it. You are in the same dilemma that we are in. We're all in a state of suffering. And so when I look at these tables that I see around the world where people are invited in to talk about things, and I've been at some of those tables, you know, I remember working in Bali with Archbishop Tutu, and we're wrestling with these questions of justice, really, you know, which you said earlier. And the first step is to see the mess we've made of it everywhere. And the Archbishop is articulate about what happened in South Africa and about how Truth and Reconciliation, which is the reason I wanted to have this long discussion with him, what does reconciliation look like? Not just in South Africa, and how did the process not work so well in Rwanda? What does reconciliation look like in the individual? How do we reconcile within ourselves our appetite for violence or thievery or power, the appetite for power? How do we reconcile that with compassion and these other impulses we have, which are just as strong? And I wanted to go up the scale with him. What does truth and reconciliation look like in the family? How would truth and reconciliation work in what some people call the war in the kitchen? And talking with him about that, I realized, yeah, there are some ways in which culturally we can share all over the world about where we're going to go and what's going on. But the first step, my God, has to be for everybody to be honest about the trouble that is there in every culture. Nobody has the right to stand up and say they know and the others are ignorant. The best we can do is get the best people at the table. And, you know, for me, if you read, you know, you're talking about reading my work, it's mind-boggling to me that there has been really no real place at the table in which we discuss our fate for Native people in North America, that they have been denied that. And I asked an elder of mine, a man named Oren Lyons, an Onondaga chief, I asked him once, you know, in a joking way, I said, so when the problem is environment, you know, we're always asking Indian people to speak, or if the problem is spirituality, you know, we're asking Indian people to talk about spirituality. But why aren't you guys ever welcome at the table when the topic is governance? And And he said, Barry, I can tell you why. For most of us in different traditions, different tribal traditions, there is no governance that is not inherently a spiritual exercise and takes into consideration all life, not just human life. And so that's why nobody wants to listen to us when we talk about governance, because of the deference we show to the non-human world, and because we're not talking about religion, we are talking about spirituality, which is what that man was doing when he put that piece of meat in the water.
Yeah, I mean, so even if we leave all the other countries that we don't, and even the other countries that we couldn't know as well as we know our own, if we just think about our own country and we think about, or even our own state, and we think about the two, I think to say problems would be to understate the actual phenomenon. So the crimes would be a way to say stronger than crimes. You're talking about the possession of the continent and then the racism built into this state, let's say, the history of this state. Even listening to you now, it can sound overwhelming. It can certainly feel overwhelming. And I guess I would ask, concretely, what does it look like to start working toward reconciliation, so that if we go back to at least the metaphorical take on the raccoon that is removed from the road when we ourselves are driving to get somewhere quickly, that raccoon, okay, solid resting place. But now we're not talking about things that we're looking for a resting place. We're talking about going forward. We're trying to improve the situation. How can we not be overwhelmed by it, and how can we take meaningful steps toward the kind of reconciliation you're talking about?
Well, the answer to not being overwhelmed is to recognize that you're in a community, and that we have these images of this profound love that a mother has for a child, this capacity to be concerned about the fate of another, that's staggering. It's staggering to behold. But that is a piece of some larger piece of fabric, and that's the way we relate to each other. And if we don't do that, we can't face the things that overwhelm us. Nobody's in this alone. Nobody is in this alone. We are in this, for better or worse, with each other. It doesn't mean that, in a lot of traditional societies support a group within the group that are deferred to as people who are carrying, they're carrying two histories at least, the history of their people and the history of themselves. And the quality that they have that everybody depends on is they're not in it for themselves. I've listened to a lot of elders speak, and you hardly ever hear them speak about themselves. You don't hear that first person pronoun. It's just, I don't know, it's a way of speaking that you realize what's being talked about all the time is us. I'm thinking, I don't know why, I just thought of this. Martin Buber made this distinction between an I-it relationship and an I-thou relationship. And anybody who travels outside this country comes back, I think, to the United States, and you're immersed in this world of advertising which is all about I-it, the treating of a human being as though the human being had no value outside its capacity to consume. And it's degrading to be in, and it's exhausting to fight your way out of. But in every traditional society that I've been in, and I'm not saying that these people would agree with each other, the epistemological differences are beyond your ability to understand, but I would say that a distinguishing characteristic is the existence of a group of people who are deferred to, and this idea that everybody's voice should be heard is somewhat bizarre. because a lot of people have really nothing to say, and it's a great luxury when you can do that. But we're not living in an environment anymore in which we have that kind of luxury. You know, we should, in our culture, the one that you and I grew up in, we've found ways to marginalize our elders and push them out of the way. They're seen as an impediment to progress. My God, what a crazy idea. They're the guides. They're the repositories of what will work. You can. I had this idea came to me the other day. What would a traditional elder, at least in the way I see it, how would they be able to perform in Renaissance England? Or how would they be able to perform in New York City in 2015? The same. Elders have an ability to grasp what has essentially gone wrong and to see the way through it. And they embody great courage and a kind of intelligence that is not tied to time or to progress, or an elder is never outdated. You know, they might be looking around for a contemporary idiom in which to express themselves, but we've marginalized the people that could have grown up in our society as elders, and that's part of this somewhat strange idea to me that everybody should be heard. You know. I guess the reason I'm thinking that this is, or I called it, I think earlier, a bizarre idea, is that we're living in a state of emergency, and you wouldn't know it by turning on television or something like that. Yeah, we're talking about ISIS or whatever the subject is going to be, but global climate change, it doesn't. Violent jihadists and the holiest of holy people, it's all the same to global climate change, you know, if you personify it. And we're dealing with that, and, you know, the nightmare that's coming for people who are just accustoming themselves to global climate change is ocean acidification. And right behind it is all of this methane gas that's coming out of melting tundra. So when you have problems that are this big, you weep if you don't have grown-ups.
So I suspect everyone in here, I certainly has a strong sense of big problems, and as I've been reading, it's interesting. Organizationally, Oregon Humanities tries to make a case that getting people to talk together is actually a serious response to serious problems. Yeah. And there are a couple places in your writing where you talk about the antidote of conversation. Mm. Even at the end of Apologia, you, if I remember right, you're going to see a friend, and there are two dogs whose tails are wagging at the door, and then you walk in, and that's what's there, is the antidote of conversation. And I had not heard that phrase before, and I wonder what you mean, and what is it an antidote for, and how does it work?
I don't know. You know, most things don't have an answer. It's the conversation, you know. Conversation with another person that's founded on mutual courtesy and respect is informing in ways that cannot be imagined at the beginning of the conversation. And what you're doing in some ways, I think, is reassuring each other that you will not die miserably. You're saying, nobody can figure this out, but we will not quit. Or you're finding some elaborate and I think quite beautiful way of saying, how are you doing? Mm-hmm. You know, I have, like everybody here, you know, I can imagine you saw a movement, you saw an animal make a movement, or you saw the way that your grandmother reached out to you as a grandchild. You saw something that was so beautiful that it left you breathless. And for me, among those things are the Beethoven Ninth, and the reason for it is in the fourth movement of the Beethoven Ninth. These tonal values that are coming from the strings and horns are all of a sudden language. And the thing that is abstract and non-representational is all of a sudden real, and a real thing is named, and real emotions are called by their names, the Ode to Joy in the Schiller poem. And when that moment comes, when in the fourth movement, when this, what we call music, becomes language, you can feel in an auditorium, you can feel people come right up, straight up through their spines, and they're fully awake and filled, they're flooded with what Schiller was talking about and what Beethoven was trying to represent, was the attitude of joy. And you turn to the person next to you who is a total stranger, and you know, in this curious way that it's a moment that passes, of course, but you think, I would do anything for this person sitting next to me. I don't know their history or their aspirations, but in this moment, I see them as I see myself, as part of something magnificent, and that's what that music is. And my belief is that that literature, which, you know, the burden in literature is that it's literal. You know, it's the only one of the arts that can be taken literally, and people can be done with it at that point. But if it's really literature, it's Evan Cannell, a novelist, said once, with a good book you never touch bottom, meaning that the metaphorical depth of the story, however simple it might be, is so great that you can spend a very long time here and not be bored, because it's about the thing that's incomprehensible, of which you yourself are a part.
But it feels like part of the challenge here is that we can so clearly and persuasively anatomize the many things that are wrong.
Say more about it.
We can so, I mean, if we think about, take the essay Flight, where you cover the planet several times, and you're both, I think, attending to the aesthetic experience of flight, but you're also thinking hard, in a way like in Apologia, about what are the consequences of traveling this quickly, what is required, what kind of violence is being done. And what I meant to suggest, based on your last few comments, is that we can see pretty clearly all the things we do wrong. Maybe we don't pay enough attention, but at least the potential is there to talk about acidification of oceans, or how this continent was settled. And we can really get fairly specific and clear. And the hard part seems to be that if we're holding out against that, the alternative is something like beauty or joy or mystery. It becomes difficult to say something that seems unclear could be the potential solution to something that is so clear.
I'm trying to link that to what you pointed out earlier, this the antidote to anxiety that conversation can become. One of the things that I see as a difficulty for us is that we've divided ourselves, without thinking about it very much, into those that know and those that don't know. And the ones who know are really interested in strategies to tell the ones who don't know what they know, which is means nobody really gets anywhere. So I consciously look for situations in which, let me try to go about this in another way. as a writer, I know that if I am going to write about something, the kinds of things that we're talking about, which actually I haven't done very much. You know, the reason I do things like, you know, go to Afghanistan or to northern Sumatra after the tsunami hit there in 2004 is I know by placing myself in these environments and putting my face in human suffering that I have a chance of not becoming complacent. I don't want to write about those things, but whatever it is that I do write, I want to reflect the effort to see that to write with respect for all of those who are in terrible, terrible straits. I just, you know, I'm not saying this very well. If you're going to write about anything well, you've got to be aware of how deeply you don't know, is what it amounts to. I remember once when I was a very young man going to lunch with Peter Matheson, and very kind fellow took me to lunch, you know, and I was, but I said to him, look, how can you you know, travel with George Schaller and in the Himalaya and look for snow leopards and write this remarkable book and hear in your ear all the time what an extraordinary writer you are and all of the praise that goes with that, and then do the most essential thing, which is to walk out the door and know that you do not know anything. You're not, nobody needs you. Someone needs a story, but they don't need the storyteller. What people really need is this pattern that you make as a writer. That you observe the world and you create a pattern in language that has this that grows out of the complexity of human life and human interaction with the world. You try to make this pattern, and ideally what happens is a reader comes to the pattern, and the pattern is set up in such a way that there's a lot of room for them and their personal history and their emotions and their fears and their aspirations in the pattern that you've made. So ideally, they immerse themselves in the story and forget you. You as the storyteller are not what's needed, not what is essential. What's essential is the story. What is essential is the Beethoven Ninth, or whatever it is that makes you spiritually articulate or raises up inside you the desire to come to life. So making these things is just the thing that you do in the community. But I think for a reader reading about global climate change or whatever it is, if you're asking that reader to open herself up to some sense of responsibility about all of this, and you imply that you're not implicated, that's the end of it. You know, the reader has to believe that you are in a position similar to the one that he or she is in, that is bewildered, looking for some kind of order in a bad storm, and that you've made this thing, and perhaps it will help them organize their own ideas. So, you know, somebody who's developing policy in government, for example, if they read a piece of fiction of yours, and then the way the mind operates, you know, it just rotates inside their heads at night, and then the next day they see the solution to this thing that has been stymieing them, that's on their desk, that has to do with racism or whatever it is. That's how story works. I think that, you know, and I mean, this is one, you know, of 10 million writers thinking about it, so it's just me talking, but I've often wondered, where did this come from? Where did this thing come from that we call story? And part of an answer for me is asking myself, what goes wrong? What goes wrong for us that story makes right? What is that? And eventually, it occurred to me that what happens to us, the Achilles heel of consciousness, if you will, is that we forget. We forget what we mean by our lives. We find ourselves in these moments when we say, how could I have ever said that to that person? How did I do that? Because you forgot who you were. In the moment, you forgot what you mean by your whole life. So we do it all the time. And I think people began to realize that if they could make something that would help a person understand again what they meant by their lives, then that would be a good thing. And I think that's where story comes from. So when you're listening to, in an oral culture, when you're listening to somebody tell a story, I would often ask myself, how can somebody tell a story in a language that I can't understand? I'm just kind of there, watching how people behave, and I can see that the storyteller is telling a story in such a way that the kids are glued, and then there are these older folks who are there right there too. So, I know it's metaphorically deep, otherwise the older people would be snoring. But the thing that's, the few things I could understand about that kind of storytelling was that it's not ironic. If it were ironic, the kids would think, something's going on here that I'm not supposed to get, and then they would just tune out. The storyteller is saying in a straightforward way, he or she is making a set of relationships. And as you're listening to the story, you're finding yourself again, and you're recreating, the story is recreating inside of you the order out of which comes your own understanding of what it is you mean by your life. So I think story was invented to protect us from this obvious problem that you have, or I have, or she has. We all have. We forget what we mean by our lives. We stumble, we fall on our faces, and then the community picks you up, or the storyteller brings a story and just leaves the story with you. And if you find your pattern in it, then you find a way to stand up and go on.
Yeah. It makes me want to tell a very short story and
Sure.
then ask one more question. A story about watching someone read a story.
Yeah.
And my son, when he was very young.
How old is
he? At the time, he must have been 3 or 4. So he wasn't doing the actual reading. He was having it read to him, and the story was Puff the Magic Dragon. And there was one time I remember reading it to him when I started to see on his face something like the expression you just made. He was starting to get it. Yeah. And got to the last page, and he burst into tears. He got it. He felt the pattern of that story. It became real for him.
Wow.
And he was crying, and I was thinking, great. This kid's a reader. I tell that story maybe because I'm not sure what it means, and so we're in a good place for that. But it does seem like it's interesting thinking about story as a kind of response to something that's broken, which I thought I heard you suggesting.
Yeah.
But again, it pushes me back to that question at the beginning that I was asking about awareness, and so many times it seems like our awareness can be directed towards the broken. Even what we've talked about tonight, I think we can really emphasize the broken. And I'm thinking about 2 things you've said. We had a couple slides of lines of your writing, and one of them is you're saying, sort of above all as a writer, you want to contribute to a literature of hope.
Yeah.
And so I want to ask, I think the last question I'll ask, and then we can open it up, I want to ask how to hold these 2 things together, the awareness, the attention, and the hope.
I am thinking about a time when in Lebanon, in Palestinian refugee camps, talking to people about their dilemma. And it's very painful for them. And I think one thing that I've done or tried to do as a writer is to is to train myself not to be afraid of looking foolish. You're trying to listen to another person, and if you seek clarification and you ask a stupid question, well then, you asked a stupid question. If you're interested in sounding smart or, asking a smart question, then this isn't the right thing for you. You're there for other people. You're there for your own people. And you're trying to listen, and you not just you say something unknowingly that's culturally inappropriate. Not just that, but you really. What do I know about what happened to Palestinians in 1948? All I can do is feel empathy of some sort or sympathy, and participate to some degree in this unresolved grief that those people feel. And from there, after I left there, I was in Tajikistan for a while, the most economically impoverished of all the old Soviet republics. I was in a village for a while, 80% unemployment. How in the world do people manage, And I went through a couple of other places that were, where, I just lie awake at night in a state of grief and hope. Mm-hmm. And when I called Deborah, my wife, when I was in Jakarta, getting on a plane to come home, and I said, I have more hope for humanity now than when I got off the plane in Beirut. Mm. And the reason for it is this quality in unaffiliated people. And what I mean by that is they're not in government, they're not in this business or that business. They are, their life is with human beings, and they're the ones that people defer to. So you're in a really bad situation, somebody like me is watching, who is it that these people defer to? So if this woman says, let's do that, the other people say, yes, what's my part? And what I saw, I think, is something that's ancient in humans, which is to maintain yourself in the face of disaster and trauma by believing in each other, and what happens when no one is afraid of being forgotten. No one will be forgotten. Everybody's present, and everybody has an intuition about what they should be doing, and if they don't, then they can ask these elders in different cultures. So how can you look at the kinds of things that we're facing, for example, in the United States, the unraveling of democratic society under the forcing pressure of turbocharged capitalism. If you're looking at that, where are you to become hopeful? How are you to become hopeful? You just look at the person that you married, or you look at your children, or you look at the women and men that you feel represent something that you represent too, but you are not articulate about what it is. Mm-hmm. So the capacity to manage the trauma and the difficulty and the nightmare comes from an awareness of the capacity of others to do well in terrible situations, and that's where your hope comes from. And I think it's forever been like that. I mean, we have this idea in the West about progress next year's car will be better or whatever. But it won't be. We'll still be in the same place, struggling with our own innocence, our own ignorance, and our own innocence. And the best we're going to be able to do is really to take care of each other. And it's such a curious thing to me now, this word love, which is, has been burdened with, it's been pulverized by advertising, and it's an abused term. But if you are a metaphorical person, if you are listening to music and looking at art and reading literature, and picking up a poem to read to your child, you get it. You understand that the thing here, that the temptation in America is to want to be in power, and the calling in the country should be to be in love with the people that are your family, to be in love with your community, to be in love with the earth. Meaning, I have a lot of trouble with this unrequited love, this idea in the West of unrequited love. You can't have love if it's not reciprocated. And the reciprocal relationship of the capacity to love has got to be accompanied by the capacity to be loved. You can't love something and then not permit it to come back, then it's something else. And if you look into the history of the development of ideas about what we call ecology today, from 1910 or 12 or whatever, what you see is an elucidation of today what is called ecology, of loving relationships in the non-human world. Meaning, certainly they're biochemical, and there's lots of the predator-prey relationship, all that kind of stuff. It's all there. You can talk about it in that dispassionate way, but really what it is this reciprocation, and it's the reciprocation that holds everything together. Once the reciprocation is gone, everything is shattered.
So what I want to do is I want to somewhat brusquely, and I apologize for that. I want to. Oh,
I want to.
Please.
Yeah, I get to do that. Don't
you
I?
Do. You do. Bring it. Yeah.
So last night when I was lying awake in bed, I thought, what is that? What is it that line that I read in a letter that Emily Dickinson wrote in 1861, and I tried to say it to myself, and I thought, oh, for crying out loud, stop trying to remember it, go look it up. So I'm in my workroom thinking, where the hell is it? So I found it, but Deborah, my wife, was saying from the bed, what are you doing? So here's what I was doing.
Great.
So before we transition to questions, I just want to share these. I felt that we'd know what this would mean by this point. This is Emily Dickinson. Miss Dickinson is regarded as a naive by many people, and a person unfamiliar with the passionate world that many of us would like to live in, forgetting that she called making love rowing in Eden. I think Emily knew a lot more than we gave her credit for. But this is this lovely line in a letter to a friend that she wrote in 1861. This world is just a little place, just the red in the sky before the sun rises. So let us keep fast hold of hands, that when the birds begin, none of us be missing. Emily Dickinson. Now we can do it.
Thank you. So, thank you for doing that. We have a microphone in the darkness, kind of, over there. And if you could line up with questions for Barry back toward the exit sign so that the people behind the aisle can see. That would be great. And if you could just introduce yourself before asking the question, that would be great. So if anyone's game to start.
Hi, I'm Judith.
Hi, Judith.
Hello. Last year I was involved in a lot of social justice and equity work. And at first there was a whole lot of interest in it. And then the community piece fell apart little by little as pressure got put on and fear was involved. So I'm wondering because if we had community, I believe we would have had success in many of our efforts. So I'm curious about your ideas calling in community in fearful times and spaces.
What did you think in that moment when you saw that community disintegrating?
Oh, well, many things. There could be many reasons that people stepped away, and it was very, one of my impulses was to think, wow, this is so complex, and the idea was so simple at the beginning.
Yes.
And then it became very complex as the fear started to come in.
Right.
So I think that was a large part of it, and it was, I don't know how to, I was a leader in it, and it was a strong question of how much do I hold and how much do I reach out and how much do I continue to trust how the community is moving.
Well, trust is the big thing. These efforts like the one you describe are, you find yourself face to face with an act of faith. And, each man, each woman in those moments has got to make that decision whether they're going to step into that dangerous territory. I think that's one reason that I think about the willingness to make yourself look foolish, or not care if you look foolish. Mm-hmm. This culture that we live in is one in which we're all encouraged to look good, but we don't. And you can't be afraid of not looking your best when what you're after is survival. And that's what we're talking about. So you could search in those situations that you try to create for the reasons not to lose faith and do it again. Because if you don't do it again, it will fall apart again. So thanks for the effort that you made to hold a center.
Yeah, thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Sarah Kirschenbaum, and I'm struck by two things. One is your emphasis of honoring elders, and the other is that I'm looking at two white male, middle class, I'm guessing heterosexual men talk about changing a world of patriarchy, capitalism, and privilege. So I'm wondering, what do you think is the role for white men, middle class, heterosexual, in changing the world? And perhaps the reason we need to look at, instead of only our elders, but maybe the younger people, is they have the missing key to changing this situation.
Sure. The only thing I could say is that I can only be white and middle class. And the rest of it, I don't have any magic that allows me to be to take up an authentic position outside the one that I've grown into. My work has been, because I have had some privileges, to stick my foot in the door to say, this person, different from me, has something to say. The ideal that you are expressing is laudable and achievable, but in order to get there, you have to make I think to try to do what I'm trying to do, and many other women and men are trying to do, which is to open the conversation to those who have not been allowed to participate in a conversation. So I'm trying to do that, and I would say that all of my teachers are trying to do that too, create this environment in which the elders can have a fuller conversation than the one that's possible now, because, as you imply, the same people end up sitting around the table, and the adjectives that you apply they're all true. So you either stay in a position in which you notice that all the time, or you move on. And we have to move on. We take the best of what we've got and talk to each other, and not ask anybody to be anybody but who they are.
Thank you.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Dave. I've read your work for decades and revered it, and even lived downriver from you in Eugene for a dozen years.
Oh.
And yet, this is the first time I've heard you speak. And it's been a profound experience for me. I've been quite moved by what you've said and what's been drawn out through your questions. And I'm curious if this is a stretch for you. Is this part of your response to what you see as the emergency in the world? I mean, this has got to be a big step to leave your refuge on the McKinsey River or to write and, reflect. So I'm just curious about what drew you here tonight, and I was really caught by what you said about community and what more you see we might do or you're doing to affirm community and in a response to the state of the world right now. Kind of a meandering question, but
yeah. Well, I would say that because I was determined to travel outside the familiar, if you will, and to become at least superficially conversant with realities other than the one that is the norm for me. I came to feel, I'm 70 now, and I mean by that I feel more grief now than I ever have had, but I've also somehow, I'm all right with that. I want to be of help, and as a writer, and I make common cause. When you use the word community, there are all kinds of communities that you participate in simultaneously, and one of them is with a lot of my friends who are painters and choreographers and photographers and composers who are roughly my age. We have conversations often where we don't share the same jargon because our disciplines are different, but our sense of what it means to be socially responsible as an artist or as a writer is in the foreground, and we push each other and we collaborate in the way I believe that artists once did. We Western culture has been through a tremendous change because of the ascendancy of the rational mind, and empirical knowledge and metaphorical knowledge has been marginalized. You know, in the 15th century, you went to the theater to understand what was true or what reality was. And today, that authority has been usurped, I would say, by Baconian methodologies, by science and the rational mind. I'm not trying to say there's something wrong with it, but there is most definitely something wrong with the idea that science and art aren't standing together as equals to address the problems that the world faces. Art has always helped people through the agony of trying to understand enough to keep your family alive. Art, and so for me and for the women and men who are my friends, I think that we talk to each other for 40 years or whatever, we're always saying, what is our responsibility? What is, and it's difficult, I think, for a writer or an artist, because you're acutely aware of what some people call an artistic vision. And you're acutely aware that in order to bring this thing out in Western culture, you've got to really have an overbearing ego. And so you have to find some way to understand how, because of the driven personality that you represent, which causes a certain amount of social havoc around you. Go into any family where there is a writer or an artist, and it's heartbreaking, you know, to see. If not to pick on anybody in particular, but you know, there's a well-known film about Andy Goldsworthy, and it's full of images of his work and his land arts work. But it's also, if you're paying attention, there's not a lot of obvious love between him and the family that supports him. We know that goes on, and I have used to have a terrible problem with that. But what I realize is the effort to bring the arts back into an equal standing with the sciences as oracles for human beings to take advantage of, to understand what they're doing and where we're going. Some things have been expressed in a. It's a hard thing to do.
Beautiful.
So, you know, I guess what I end up saying is that this idea, which I feel so strongly about, of social responsibility, goes hand in hand with what I was saying to Adam earlier on about nobody needs you as a painter or a writer or a composer or a choreographer. Nobody needs you. But they may need that dance or that music or that story in order to go on. And because that is the case, you have a social responsibility to make that thing as well as you can, and then to give it away. And if you live in the world that we live in, that is an extremely difficult thing to do, because we live in a world of commerce and this poisonous thing of celebrities and important people, you know. So.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you,
Yeah.
Adam.
So I think we'll take these last three questions, and then do I have three right over there, or two? Yeah, thanks.
Hi, my name is Gretchen Eisnogel, and I first just wanted to say thank you. It's just an extraordinary encounter. Thank you. I was drawn in particular to respond to an almost implicit connection between brokenness and storytelling, and I love. I'm a writer, primarily a playwright, and the notion of a play as an architecture into which you're inviting your audience is extreme. So that notion, I think, not only of writing potentially as creating a space in which we can remember, as you say, the meaning of our own lives, but also because we are continually being broken, the remaking of ourselves, in the context of a supportive community, of a work that gives us a container for that.
Yeah.
Yesterday I was over at the Museum for Contemporary Craft on the other side of town, and there's a small display there of things that have been damaged, works that they have, priceless works that have cracks, have been broken clean in half, and they have a display of these things. And there was a line that caught me there, and it said, even broken objects have stories. And I thought, isn't the adverb only broken things have stories?
Right. Right.
And it just struck me. I think that in terms of what we try so hard to shove under, it's really just our common condition of brokenness,
Yeah.
and of damage. And as I think those of us who are in positions of extremis, various reasons, that it's not something any of us could even tolerate having said about us, but it is a privilege to be unable to deny one's brokenness and to walk around in a state of vulnerability because of the invitation that it almost effortlessly makes to another broken creature. And that common work becomes so, the Martin Buber is, my motto currently right now is all real living is meeting.
Yeah.
And I want to thank you for embodying that tonight.
Well, thank you for embodying it yourself. Thank you for what you said.
Good evening. My name is Mike, and once again, I'd like to echo, I think, a lot of the sentiments of gratitude and appreciation, Barry, for you coming and sharing your thoughts and giving us, I think, a sense of hope and encouragement. It's quite profound, I think, many of the things you've had to share. One of the things I think I would like to ask for your thoughts on is the idea of resiliency. And resiliency in the sense of a couple of things. I think most metaphorically, the natural world. And in working in land conservation and conservation around Oregon, we do see the importance and the natural capacity for natural systems to be resilient, to adapt to impacts and change. And I think also on a macro level, the resiliency of communities to accept hardship and to make the most of it. But I think more personally, the capacity for individuals to be resilient. And I think many of us who have read your work and also know your personal story and the I don't know if this is the right word, the courage, the Harper's article that you wrote a little while ago, I think affected many of us very deeply. And the resiliency that you yourself have shown and the hope that you've given us tonight, but also looking forward, knowing the adversity that we will face as individuals and our individual efforts and causes and purposes and lives, resiliency. I would be very grateful to hear your thoughts on that word and how we can be resilient as individuals and help the society be resilient.
Thank you. Resiliency, you can't quit. You can't quit on yourself, and you can't quit on the rest of us. We can't quit on each other. And the only way we'll be able to see our resilience is when we're determined not to give up on each other.
Thank you. I think we have one more question. Yeah, thanks.
Hi. I won't end on a simple note, but I've been teaching trying to teach writing, failing most days, in South Dakota for the past 3 years. And I went there because my grandfather had a homestead, grew up there, but was part of the legacy that has been part of the conversation tonight. And I sense that my students every day struggle between telling their own stories and respecting the stories, the wisdom of their elders. And there's a group here in Portland, Wisdom of the Elders, that very much tries to put forward that wisdom, to preserve it, to retell it. I'm sure you're aware. So I wonder if you have any thoughts about that balance between retelling the stories, respecting the stories of our elders, but then bringing forth that bottled up creativity that all these young people have.
Well, the stories that the elders tell are the blueprints. And thank you for teaching. Thank you for making the effort to teach. This hugely important work that you're doing with young people. I see something happening now which wasn't true when I was growing up, and that is the people of my generation trying to make common cause with younger people. Younger people have great energy, great compassion, and they have a firm grip on their ideals. And if we can find, as older people, a way to make common cause with them, then we'll really have a great, strong thing to bring against everything that threatens our lives. But I would encourage you to give yourself away. Every teacher gives herself or himself away in order to bring to life what's nascent, what is yet to be seen in these younger people. And they have the stories to tell that will inspire us and will destroy part of our loneliness. And if you're doing that work, then that's holy work. And all you need to know about the elders' stories is that they're the blueprints. They're what we refer to when we're trying to make something beautiful. Thank you for teaching.
So I want to do 3 quick things by way of closing, and the third will be to do again what just spontaneously happened, which will be to say a big thanks to Barry. Before that, I want to just let people know about something you can learn more about, and that is that there's a Barry Lopez Visiting Writer in Ethics and Community Kickstarter campaign, and that's happening in Hawaii. And I want to make sure that if you're interested, you know that you can find postcards that look like this on the back tables. So I hope you won't be shy about looking into that. Second, I wanted to say, related to much of what we've been talking about, the effort to build conversation and community, there are a lot of organizations around the state and in Portland working on this right now. I know that Oregon Humanities right now is partnering with a number of organizations on things like discussions around race and policing. And there are a number of events going on the next 4 weeks around town here, also around everything from the meaning of the Second Amendment